Hi, my name is Deb Mostert. This is my studio space. I'm an artist working in Southeast Queensland. So these are older works that I've been uh, that show me that I've been thinking about this for a while, and things in the studio that don't that when the show is finished, the exhibition's done, they come back into the studio and they sit around me, and um, yeah, sometimes you riff back off them into other works, and it's part of the studio clutter that I find really important for me to be in a space that feels filled with beauty and things that I'm interested in. It's a Victorian glass covered dome cloche that's in the collection that dates back to the late 1800s, and it's filled with birds that are not of any relevance to each other. They're all together. Just they were probably chosen because they were beautiful looking birds, not because they had any relevance to each other or an environment. And I thought that was quite fascinating. So I did a painting of that, and then at the museum I did a little sketch, and then I did the painting in the studio, and then I thought I'd like to expand that to. So that's the nature taxidermy, and then I wanted to do a culture souvenir version of that same cloche. So I chose lots of stuffed birds and from images, and then put them all together, stitched them in Photoshop, and made the painting from that. So I think I've traced my collecting habit back to a childhood dog collection, which my family added to over the years, and I've pared back to just what I have now, which is kind of more classic dogs, things that I really love. But I know that I have an urge to collect. I have that instinct in me, and there's always the struggle. Well, how much of this is necessary? How much of it has value? But as an artist, I've been using still life and collections for the last 30 years in my practice. So I have that excuse that I'm using it for my artworks, but I also, to be honest, just love having small objects around me. The Wunderkammer idea that I have been working with for a few years now. The Wunderkammer is a German phrase for a cabinet of curiosities. It's the precursor to our modern museums, where people in Victorian times or earlier would be collecting things from all around the world, at a time when international trade routes were opening up, when colonization was happening, and they would bring objects back to their cabinet and display them. These were the early museums, and so that was a good entry point, because I know that I have a fascination with cabinets of curiosity, with collections, and it meant that I could see the link between my own collections and my own habits and a museum of sorts, and then yeah, what to do with that? How do I feel about that? It's an important thing to ask ourselves. Why do we have things? Why do we have objects around us? What value have objects in our life? What value are objects in the museum? And in the context of this body of work, it's about animal objects. Because I was in the museum space a lot and amongst scientists, and you're looking at the taxonomy of animals. I thought, what would it look like to have a taxonomy of tin birds? I love wind up tin toys. I love and I love birds, so I thought I'll take tin toy birds. I made a Latin name for them, and then I went from the most generic down to the most specific, and so we end up with the species that is just a wind up naturalistic tin bird. But it had to go through that process, that sort of semi scientific process. I'm always looking at how does the language, how can the language of science inform the work, in this context of the museum. I've been interested in how culture affects how we learn from the cultural objects that we make from animals. We profit from making facsimiles in our cultural practices, at the real risk of losing the originals, which is hard to understand. So I thought, and then I was thinking about children and how they play with these toys. The museum, you have objects of taxidermy, natural objects of taxidermy, and then you exit via the gift shop, and you go and you look at all the cultural objects, the souvenirs of this experience, which are all animal objects. And when children are clamoring for a toy or a souvenir to take away from a natural experience, what then do they do with that? So I took one of my sharks and I gave it to a small child and I said, "Can you just play with this?" And so that child was playing and holding, and I took a whole lot of photos and did some drawings around that. And I was interested in the way the imagery was ambiguous in whether there was sinister intent or from the shark or from the child. Which way was it going to go? It's called play prey, because it's hard to it's hard to sort of fathom which way it could go. And I feel that's a sort of an interesting metaphor for the larger environmental sort of concerns that this body of work has about, we are profiting from from our animals, but we objectify them and we are making facsimiles when we may well lose the originals. We've got a lot of animals that are on endangered lists, and it's a concern to me. So what to make of all of that? Basically, I'm still trying to work it out myself, but it's I'm using these animal objects as a way to discuss larger environmental concerns. And so, the squid work, it's definitely about single-use plastic. We all know about those little soy sauce fish. They're not great. They end up in our oceans, our creeks, and our oceans. But equally, the very attractive, alluring plush squid that is just um, it's got the same push pull that taxidermy has. You're drawn to it because it's so cuddly and cute and plush and soft, but at the same time, I am feeling a frisson of concern about it. Like, oh, how long is this going to last? Where will it end up? It will end up in landfill. And so, is it just as much single-use plastic as the little soy sauce fish? So these works, uh, they have the initial allure, but there's a sting in the tail. They're attractive, and we want to look at them. The same with the taxidermy. We go, oh, that's an animal, and we go to look at it, and they're, oh, it's not really an animal. It's dead. And when I go with schools to the museum, and the kids are asking, "What is that real?" I say, "Yes, it's real, but it's no longer with us. So it's an object." And is this all we're going to have left if we don't take more care? So these are the questions I'm asking. So I have been collecting animal objects, knowing I was working on this show, and I found a beautiful 1950s koala, very familiar to all of us of a certain age, that was very daggy, but very much in every child's bedroom, sort of 50s through to 70s or 80s maybe. And I chose to place it inside a diorama. Again, I'm kind of talking the language of museums, old-fashioned dioramas that used to have a great big matte landscape scene, and then taxidermy animals placed in that, and you would stand in front of it, and it was immersive. And museums are moving away from that these days. But so I needed a case, and then I came across some clocks, and I thought, oh, I can use this clock case as a diorama space. And then, yeah, what an interesting thing to think about also in case of koalas, which are, potentially becoming very vulnerable, is that the time may be running out for a lot of our animals if we continue to remove habitat. So that, again, the environmental message lays over the top of all of this work. But the clock case worked out really well as a little miniature space, a little miniature diorama space for my 1950s koala to sit in. Visiting lots of museums and looking at lots of animal objects on display. I went to the London Natural History Museum and was horrified at some of the way our native animals were displayed, because they were a museum to a museum, really. The objects were terribly displayed, and they were terribly taxidermied. They were overstuffed. They were faded. But it did get me thinking about, well, what is a museum display? What do I want to show in my little paintings of objects, animal objects, and the little clip-on koala souvenir that is everywhere. I thought, what would it look like if I was to do a cutaway, like they present cutaways in the museums, to show you how the taxidermy's been done, to show you the inside of the objects. So I imagined what the inside. Wouldn't it be cool if there was a little skeleton inside one of those little clip-on koalas? There's not. It's sadly just a little clip, very boring. But this is the fun part about making work around this theme. I investigated lots of different ways of looking at animal objects, and but again, trying to always think about it in the context of a museum space and how museums have displayed objects, how we're used to dealing with animal objects in our culture. That's sort of the parameters I've set for myself within this body of work. This leads on from the taxonomy idea that, I remember the old charts that we used to have in schools showing you, how the taxonomy of an animal. And it was great to see that in diagrammatic form. So I thought I'll use that language and I'll take an animal object at the museum first. And I started with the sharks. This was a work made for another show. And I started with the holotype of the grey nurse shark, which is a beautiful specimen. Well, it's not actually that beautiful. It's rather awful because it was a skin of a, of a grey nurse shark, and it's really valuable because it was the first one. It was the holotype that all other grey nurse sharks were measured against. So it's the type. It's a really important specimen. It's over 100 years old, and it's in the museum collection. And so I started with that, and then I looked at the cast, which was, that they take a mold of the shark and then they paint that up to make it look real, and that's in the museum. You can see that on display. And then it kind of went from there. I devolved or evolved, whichever way you want to look at it, down through all of the shark objects I could find that I thought were interesting and showed how we have taken shark, this fierce predator that we're actually so frightened of, which we hunted almost to extinction. And then they realised actually the grey nose shark is not a problem, and let's let the animal live. But this devolved down into what we have is Lego men wearing shark suits and figurines and little solar sharks and all that sort of thing. And so I thought that was it's really interesting to chart that progression from naturalistic, still an object, down through to hyper coloured. Particularly the sharks and the whale charts, they go from being naturalistic colours down to bright blue, like every shark, every whale is bright Pantone blue. But yeah, it's fascinating. So, and at the bottom of the chart there is a legend, so you can look up the number and you can see the information that I've been able to find out about that object. So what it is, where it was made, what it's made of, and its origin of manufacture. So that has created a beautiful series of works, which I really think shows that de-evolution very in a fun way. The sketchbooks are important to me because they're part of my process, but and most of my ideas for exhibitions come out of just recording life, as is my habit in a sketchbook. So while I was at the museum and I was doing some research on another project, I noticed the taxidermists working. I was there in their space, and so I started documenting 2017 how they were working with animals. And this is kind of the genesis of this show, came from watching an animal go from being an animal to an object via the process of taxidermy. And so I recorded all of that in my sketchbooks. I would just follow the taxidermists around, drawing on the fly as they were doing. I didn't want to stop them working, so I just drew while they were doing their thing. And it is very confronting to see an animal unpacked. From an artistic point of view, as an artist, I found it incredibly interesting to see the insides, to understand the anatomy of the animal, and that has a rich history, of course. In understanding anatomy is a good thing to do if you're going to be an artist who works with animals. So the sketchbooks have grown over. I think there's maybe 6, 7, 8 of them now, pertaining to this body of work, because I have been thinking and drawing about this for some time. And there's a few concertina ones which are in the show, which show me following the taxidermists around and recording that. And I understand that is can be confronting for people, but equally I get just as confronted when I go out via the gift shop and see mass-produced stuffed stuff, because that's almost a squeamish making as watching an animal being turned into an object, to see mass-produced animal. I don't want to preach about any of this. This is about just what I'm asking myself. as a self-confessed collector and a lover of objects, I'm torn with the same horror of consumerism and sort of that exploitation. I'm uncomfortable with that exploitation. So how can I engage with the natural world? Well, I should probably be out drawing it and looking at it that way. So that's what I like to do in between all of this is lots of in the sketchbooks is lots of trips to zoos and to nature parks and places like that. And my own natural environment allows me to draw birds and creatures in my own backyard, and that has led me to more. It feels more honest and it feels less yeah, less like consumerism to to engage that way. Yeah.